I started doing these shows at my grandmother's house in La Jolla when I was 17. All my buddies would come after this. I got a camera when I was 16 in 1966. Started shooting the surf around La Jolla, which I was lucky. It was fabulous surf in La Jolla. And I'd have slideshows, and they'd all come. And I was staying at my grandmother's house. She had this beautiful Frank Lloyd Wright type of house in La Jolla, but she was deaf. But her sense of smell was like midnight at the lab, you know? And she was decrepit, and so I had the whole downstairs, and we'd have these big gatherings of all my friends, and they'd set up, like, believe it or not, a hookah pipe once, and they'd be smoking, and in the middle of the show, my grandmother bangs her cane on the stairway, and all my buddies, like 30 surfers, macho surfers, stop like this. And she goes, "Jeff, is somebody smoking down there?" And I go, "No, Grandma, yeah, somebody." And 4 or 5 of my friends just fled the house and got in their cars and drove away. This is in a day where people were more paranoid and all that. But anyway, so I started at my grandmother's house slideshows. This is, the beginning of the show, I'm going to get into showing you how I did what I do. These were the elements that I used early on in the 70s, and this was a Hodgman raft that used to be rented to all the tourists throughout the United States. These are the fins I used to go out in the big waves and all that. They're like duck feet UDT fins. So these are my tools. That's me on the right. This is probably about 74. With my friends in Ala Moana and Waikiki, and so that's the raft I use, and the fins and the water housing, and a few more pounds on the frame now. But this is where I used to love to shoot. This is on Oahu on the North Shore. This is Sunset Beach, and you go out through that shore break on the left, and you have to time it. And there's a big riptide, and you can see in the lower left, the riptide carries you out to the left, where I would start paddling out in the lower left of this photo, and then you go out to the middle where there's a peak wave you can see, and that's where I negotiate and station myself to shoot. This is the same place at Sunset Beach, and this is the inside bowl, which you'd wait and wait. I'd be going back and forth on my raft and waiting for these big waves to hit the inside. Every now and then I get caught inside. It's kind of terrifying, I must say. But generally, you don't get hurt. You get embarrassed, and you kind of lick your wounds. But you get tumbled, and if the raft would go into the shore, but it would kind of come drifting back out. That's another example of kind of being on the raft and getting out of the way of the surfers. These are some of the kind of the peak moment surf shots that I would get on my raft out at Sunset Beach. This is Simon Anderson on a thruster at Sunset Beach. A lot of these were used in Surfer magazine. This is Davey Miller. He's from Ventura. This is what can happen when you don't tighten your wing nuts, come loose, and then that O-ring leaks, and then you're screwed. You lost your $2,000 camera. I don't know why he's laughing. He's smiling. So these are other things I look for when I'm out shooting. Is when a surfer, this is like looking into the shore behind the wave, and these really interesting moments happen looking back towards shoreline. It's very hard to predict. You kind of have to be a surfer to be able to predict those type of moves. This is, I really like this shot. This is looking back towards shore at Makaha on Oahu when tandem surfing was on ABC Wide World of Sports. And it's really cool to watch, kind of ballet on a wave, really neat. This is another example of high action, and you have to, that happens in a split second. So you have to really, it's kind of hard to get. This is an example of a camera mounted on a pole, and swimming around on a dry reef, and that's one of Malloy brothers. This is in Indonesia. This is another example of the camera mounted on the pole. This is in San Clemente. Kind of gives a really neat wide angle effect. This is the same spot in San Clemente. And the far right up on that point is the Western White House, former Western White House of Richard Tricky Dick Nixon. This is the same area. It's Herbie Fletcher. Kind of the pole angle with the camera mounted on a pole kind of has a little mini drone helicopter. These are my buddies, those same guys just hanging out talking. Part of surfing is social, and part of it really is a wilderness experience. These are other things that I look for is waveforms, and it's always changing with the light, time of day, and you can get some really neat shots if you kind of look for that, use different lenses. This is in Timor, or Dawn in Timor off an island. This is Black's Beach in La Jolla, looking straight down. This is this is a telephoto shot of pipeline. I really love the texture, which is kind of neat. You kind of shoot these, and then when you get them back, you realize how pretty all the texture and the wind blowing. This is in Côte de Basque in Biarritz. I was staying at a friend's house, and the weather changed really quick when we ran down there, and it was really billowy in the light. This is once again kind of behind the wave in Tahiti. Neat waveform. This is another kind of mini telephoto waveform in Tahiti. This is off of an island in Upper Baja called Todos Santos. And that's a huge wave. That's probably an 18, 20-foot wave. Like, the face is probably 20 foot. And it was after a rain and the offshore winds, and the wave hit the reef just right. This is another waveform where you go underwater and look at the wave underwater as it passes by. You wear a face mask. It's really cool to do that. There's another example of that. These were actually taken in Tonga, of all places. This is Hollister Ranch, out on a boat looking back in at dawn. So then, you start with the wave, and then you have surfers in the environment. And as I was saying, surfing is like a wilderness experience, but you can see your house or your car or something. And that's what's so cool about it, is even here you can go 50 yards off the beach and you have a wilderness experience. This is to every surfer, before you paddle out, it can be small waves, and these are obviously big waves, but you always kind of stand there and you analyze, well, what's going on, where can I paddle out, even when it's small. And so you have all different forms of terror, or these guys are they're young and they know what they're doing, but they're still going, well, just right in front of them is a riptide in that whitewater area that runs parallel to the beach, and it's like a river. So as soon as they jump in, they're getting carried sideways. This is a very benign, beautiful Santa Ana day, and this is at Hollister Ranch in Santa Barbara. It shows surfers just kind of hanging out. This is Marine Street in La Jolla, and in the lower left is sand, so you can see how close that is to the beach. It's not a big soft swell. These are huge waves at Waimea Bay on Oahu, and kind of rare. Every month or so it gets that big. That is really, really big. And tourists and people come to watch, and sometimes they get swept off those rocks. It's pretty dangerous. That day the lifeguards came up and told those guys to get off the rocks. This is an example of surf in Hawaii where it's so windy you can't go out, it's too windy, so these guys are just hanging out. This is kind of surfers in the wilderness kind of thing, even though there's about 200 people on either side of that boat. This is kind of the classic surfer's dream, a perfect day in a tropical environment with minimal people out. This was shot in the 70s at Pipeline on Oahu. This is a kind of an example of telephoto shortening. This is in Hawaii. And that's another example of the wilderness aspect. You see these phenomenal weather, fog, bright sun. This is the same area on the North Shore of Oahu. That's looking down the coast. They call it the 6 Mile Miracle. It has the most varied surf in the world. It's amazing. And has trade winds offshore, which makes it good for surfing. This is a photo I just like of the surfers, their body language. This is in Côte de Basque again in France. I really like those forms. This is a place in Sumatra called eBay, and these are surfers who are staying on land and they're hiking to go surfing. I was on a yacht looking at it. So, this is kind of yin and yang, tropical to Iceland. This is a friend of mine, Donovan Frankenreiter. He's actually a singer, famous singer now. And we went to Iceland, and I said, paddle out into this glacial area. And so he did, and he went in there and was doing that. And right then, when I took the shot, he's screaming at me, hurry up, fuck, it's freezing, hurry up, man. So another aspect is the surfing culture are these characters that you come across like you would in any kind of sport, but they're a little more Creedler types, I guess. So this is Al Chapman. He literally, I saw his car, he pulled up in this car, and I went, oh, Al, I gotta get your photo, and he said, okay, man, and he's like holding that poster, which was for a surf movie, going, this is me, man, fluid drive, and he's like going on it. And I just love his trunks. That's a Primo, is a Hawaiian beer company. And when I looked inside, the whole front floor was full of just garbage and fast food stuff. He's a renowned, he's one of the last of the living characters in the surfing world. This is another guy, another character. I think it might be one of the Runmans. They're from Kauai, actually from LA. But so there's a lot of guys that are smiley, stoned, giggly. This was in the 70s. This reminds me of all my friends so much. Just who knows what they're laughing at. But some guys are grumpy. Some guys are just kind of super eccentric. And this is a friend of mine in Santa Barbara, James O'Mahony. He has the greatest eccentric museum near the base of the pier in Santa Barbara. And I think he looks like Truman Capote. He has a museum, and I said, I gotta get a shot of you. And he breaks out his ukulele and kind of dresses up, and then he goes, what about this? And that's a 357 Magnum in his pants there. That's a subtlety. This is a guy, a boat captain in Indonesia, where Indonesia is some of the finest surf, and he has his own coffee plantation in the off season. So he sells you coffee from Sumatra. This is kind of just a nice portrait I have of a Floridian surfer on Maui. He's looking out at the surf, kind of just gazing out, and kind of pensive, but kind of a typical thing. Their boards are all piled in the back. This is Joel Tudor. He's a world champion longboarder, like legendary longboarder. He got into jiu-jitsu and was a world champion in jiu-jitsu also. He's another character. This is a friend of mine, Carl Ekstrom, who's an inventor and an architect, and he's stylized shoes and things for the military, helmets, and he helped with this wave pool that was developed by Tom Lochtefeld. And they're on Princess cruises and all that. It's a system where it pushes water out into waveforms. They're all over the place. This is Reynolds Yater. He's about 80 years old. He's this very famous craftsman board shaper. This is his house on the East Cape of Cabo San Lucas in Baja. And he always likes to point out that that's his wife's cactus garden on the far left, and how beautiful it is. They're proud of that. So another thing to all surfers is the perfect wave. And when you're a really young surfer, you draw it on your notebooks at school. But it doesn't happen where it's really perfect very often. So this is an example of perfect waves and what they are. And they're usually at reef breaks. This is in Indonesia, off Sumatra. It's a place called the Hole. And waves are long interval, which means they're 20 seconds, which makes them a little bit bigger. You can have a small swell. If it's a longer interval, it makes them bigger. There's light wind. That's called being glassy in the foreground. It's all calm. There's minimal wind, and it's peeling out down off a reef in a perfect symmetry, I guess you could say. This is Pat Gudauskas at the Hole. And as they're riding, there was probably about 6 or 7 guys out. And when guys are paddling out in the foreground, they're screaming at their buddies when they're on waves like that. It's really fun. This is another example of a perfect day. This is in Sumatra, a spot called Lance's Rights. These are things that surfers only see. So growing up, I'd come into grandma's and she'd say, "Oh, there's cookies on the table." I was spoiled. And anyway, I go, "Grandma, the whole ocean went golden." And so these things happen to you as a surfer, and you try to explain it to somebody who doesn't surf. They go, really? And so this is an area in Indonesia, and it can go golden for like 15 seconds or 10 minutes. And it's so beautiful when it does that. The whole ocean lights up. This is another example of things only a surfer sees, which is wildlife, where dolphins come right by you and go around you or right past you. And sometimes they come back and they'll be on a wave, kind of surfing a wave coming at you. It's like the neatest experience. And you always think they're going to ram you or something. They just go right by you. This is something that when you're paddling out, you see waves like this, and it's so hard to explain because it's so beautiful, but it's happening in milliseconds. But you see that, and it's just so hard to explain to somebody. There's another example of your friends in the tube, and the wave's thick, and it doesn't really quite explain it. That photo even, what it's really like. This is another thing that you see. This is backwash, where a prior wave will go up into the shoreline, hit a berm, and the energy will go back out and hit another wave. And this is a friend of mine at Makaha, which is known for backwash. And it hit the wave and made this molten glass effect, which that's like 1/500th of a second, and it's gone. But when you see that as a surfer and you try to describe it, you go home and describe it, you think, yeah, okay, right, we understand. This is another really neat thing, as I've said before. Anywhere you go, you can go underwater with a mask and a snorkel and dive under the waves and watch surfers go by, or just watch the waves, and it's so beautiful. This is an example of the pelicans kind of coming straight at you, and then they tear up, they go right above you as they go by. Big, huge pelicans. That's really a neat experience. This is another thing that's hard to describe, where it's so hard offshore, how it can look kind of like jewelry or diamondy or something. It gets really beautiful when the wind's strong. It's hard to surf, though. There's another one with the moon going down. This is Jeffreys Bay in South Africa. It's actually natural lighting. I used to go there a lot in the late 70s. This is another thing where it's hard to explain to people. It's called spit, where the wave is so hollow that the whitewater part of the portion of the wave gets spit out by the energy of I don't know how. Actually, I don't know the science of it. I should. It's a phenomenon that happens in surf. It's called getting spit out. This is just one of my favorite shots. I took it in Tahiti. I was sitting on a little ponga in the channel. It was kind of terrifying, actually. But I just love how it looks like glass, and he's pushing through. These are examples of how my work's being used in a commercial way. Yes, I sold out a long time ago. So all of this was so flattering to me because I did what I did for so long, and then it started getting used in commercial ways, which were really, the money is one thing, but it's just flattering. This is a Jan and Dean album cover. I hung out with Jan and Dean and Dennis Wilson, and I got an album cover. That's a shot in Honolulu. This is flattering for me. The Herbie Hancock album cover, they used the wave. That's why I made Shore Break on one of his albums. This is a kind of more recent Eddie Vedder or Pearl Jam single vinyl they put out to their fan club, which is really fun to have that. That's Bugs Kaleo Kalani. This is a long time ago. That's a Cocat, obviously, but that's Barry Kanayapuni. This is a cover of Surfer I got, and the story behind it is I was standing with all the other surf photographers, and we all rag on each other and make fun of each other, and there's probably about 6 guys standing behind me, and they're razzing me like, Divine, because the clouds came over. Divine, it's gonna rain. What are you doing? You dork. What? And then as soon as they said that, I went. Kelly Slater, who's on the cover here, I went, bah, 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 and I got the sequence. I gave him my best, Bart Simpson. They got all mad at me. Then it's made the cover of Surfer. So. This is one time I built a fancy house in San Clemente up on the hill, and I did hardwood floors, and I owed the contractor about $3,000. I didn't have the money, and I went, oh no, and he's kind of showing up. He wasn't getting too irate, but I walk in on a Sunday, the money's due on a Monday or a Tuesday, and I see this wrapped in the LA Times, how they wrap the funny papers on the outside. I go, that's my wave. Turns out I had licensed this wave to Hallmark cards. Hallmark owned Peanuts, and all their alarms went off, and they called me I called them on Monday. On Tuesday, Charles Schultz called me, of all people, and it was so neat to talk to him, and he apologized because I could have gone for the throat and gotten quite a bit of money, and I said, don't worry, I'm just going to charge you what's normal, which was $3,000. And I got in this big, long conversation, and I told him that, hey, Bart Simpson said stoked in Cowabunga, and he goes, no, he didn't. Peanut said stoked in Cowabunga way before Bart Simpson, and got in this big defensive thing about how Peanut said it before Bart. It's another odd thing of how my work was used. This is a dance magazine, and I have no idea who that guy is, but he's probably from New York, and he's probably a famous dancer.
He's riffing.
This at the time, my work would get used. This was Continental Airlines, which I don't think exists anymore, and this is in transit, like in bus stations and airports and all that, which was kind of flattering, kind of pretty good money. This is once these art directors in San Francisco called me and go, do you have any surf photos we could look at? We're doing a poster for the Pope's visit to San Francisco. I go, yeah, and I sent them, I had no idea what they were talking about. And that's it, I love it.
It's like mocking him.
Somebody saw this and said that her parents were Catholic, and they were so into the Pope's visit that they got a sprinkler head that had the Pope in their front. But anyway, that's a pretty funny one. Another thing about surfing, the bigger thing, is how you hold your hands. And some of it comes from, believe it or not, bullfighting, where surfers used to go to Tijuana and drink wine and kind of a rowdier era of the 60s, and they would kind of mimic some of the bullfighting poses as a style. It has to do with your body language, how you hold your hands. So these are all kind of examples of good style. It's kind of a low body language type style. This is Honolulu Bay on Maui. That's just kind of the Australians would call that what is it, an FO, BT, which means fuck off, bottom turn. That's their slang for that. This is Mark Richards, a kind of extreme body language and style, and he, to this day, he surfed so many years like that, it hurt his back, and he has a really bad back. This is kind of modernist style. He's dragging his arms. This is Matt Archibald. These are a few of my favorites and some of my more famous photos. I used to live in a house on that Pipeline, a little single room house. It was just awesome. My friend had gone on the road with, of all things, Captain and Tennille. He was the roadie for them. And he goes, "Don, you want to rent my house?" I go, "Oh, yeah." And it was right from the pipe. One day I looked out and saw this full arc rainbow, got my camera, put one roll of 36 shots, ran down and took 36 shots, and this was the only one where all the things came together. This is one of my favorite photos because it's one of my first water shot times. This is at Windansea in La Jolla. This is a friend of mine, Tom Ortner. And it's really difficult to follow focus with a 135 lens in a water house, and this one came out really sharp and nice. So that's really like that one. This is another one I love. It's an island off Ensenada, and I was on my boogie board. My raft evolved into a boogie board, and this is a giant wave, and I got clipped by it, and I got flipped and kind of tossed into the shore. It wasn't too bad, but the white water on the face of that wave means that this actual wave is smaller than the one prior to it. This is one of my favorite shots of a body surfer and his body language, and it's like my friend Mark Cunningham, who's a famous body surfer, said that this photo is like he's doing a one-handed push-up. Like, it's really hard to body surf that way. This guy's name was Red Wings. He was a real character. He ended up dying, but he was one of those fabric of our sport character type guys. This is another favorite shot of mine. This is Rel's son. She's a Hawaiian surfer from Waianae, Makaha. She integrated kind of feminine style into women's surfing because a lot of the women's surfing was kind of mimicking the guys, kind of radical, muscular, all this stuff. And so Rel, with some other women surfers, came up with this kind of feminine, smooth style that's just gorgeous to watch. And the modern day version of that is a girl named Steph Gilmore, who's a multiple world champion. If you can go online and watch film clips of her, she's incredible. This is another very famous shot of mine by Buttons Kuhio Kalani, and the reason he's doing a peace sign is he dropped in on a guy just prior, and he's like a real chatterbox, Buttons, and he was very well-known Hawaiian. The guy further behind is just going, "Fuck, I'm gonna kick your ass," blah, 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 blah. And he's going, "Peace, bro, peace." Calm the guy down, basically. This is another great shot of Lisa Anderson. She's a multiple world champion. She helped develop the surf trunks she's wearing are the early on versions of Roxy's women's surf trunks, which really changed everything, which developed into Roxy women's athletic wear and clothing. She was what I was describing about being smooth and all that. She was incredible. Still is, actually. So this is a little bit of early on. This is about 71, and this is in California near Nixon's house at Trestles in San Clemente. I'm trying to give you the feel of California kind of early on, pre-freeway and all that, and then all of a sudden the freeways went in actually in 64, but the population just kept growing and growing and growing in California. To all of us that grew up there, it was kind of like, what's going on? Like what? And it was because of the aircraft industry and all kinds of reasons people were coming to California. And in our world, my friends, we'd be at the beach, and I distinctly remember, and they'd be saying, "Can you believe all the Texans that are up in North County, San Diego? Oh my God, what are these guys doing here?" And all these people were immigrating to California, or Southern California in particular, and it made the surf more crowded and made everybody cranky, and there'd be graffiti in a lot of surf spots which were trying to intimidate you from hanging out. I remember we were young, naive, and we pulled up and we saw that, and this is in Ventura, California Street, and there's literally Hells Angels bikers and construction guys, and the surf was really good, and we saw this signage and we go, whoop, okay, moving right along. And we left. This is Sunset Cliffs, San Diego. If you're unlocal. This is, that's the pump house, and Tom Wolfe wrote the pump house game. So the surfers are trying to rag on Tom. This is a guy who, it's kind of self-explanatory. This is at a contest in Santa Cruz, and the guy was sitting in his car, and I almost went up to talk to him, but I didn't. So, as surfers in the 70s, we were influenced by the hippie movement, but we weren't hippies. The hippies were more politicized than we were. We had long hair and had all that look, and we got harassed a lot in La Jolla by, when Herbert Marcuse or Angela Davis would give a talk, they'd come and harass us and couldn't understand. But anyway, the hippie movement had an influence on the arts, therefore the art that went on your surfboard. Actually, the things that we wore were more conservative. This is an example of psychedelic artwork on the boards. This is at Laguna Beach.
The hippies lived in Encinitas and Acadia.
Yeah.
You lived in La Jolla, where everybody was
Yeah.
polite.
And so this is another example of kind of psychedelic artwork. This is an Australian, Terry Fitzgerald, who he brought the first stylized quiver, that's called a quiver boards, to Hawaii, and he had every one of those boards in a sheath, like a gray sheath, and he took them all out like they were bows and arrows and like these finely crafted. The second one from the left is called a screwdriver, which I don't know how that thing worked. So, as I was saying about the hippie thing and all that, is in the surfing world, we're actually pretty conservative. We weren't, some of that psychedelia stuff we weren't really into, at least my group. This is an example of how we were unbranded, and the things that we wore weren't given to us when the Garmento world ramped up in the 80s. All this stuff was given to us. This is a classic example of the 80s, fluoro and all that. But in the 70s, we were unbranded in the sense of you might have puka shells on, but you found the puka shells, or you might have a bag you got in Oaxaca, or you might have an amulet on your wrist from Bali, you know, a silversmith in Bali, or it was all kind of original stuff. Or you might, where I grew up, you could get hippie girls would come and measure you and they made me custom shirts. I got a couple of them with little embroidery down the front and coconut buttons and kind of, it was really, really neat. And it wasn't until the surfing and lifestyle industry really fired up in the mid-'80s that we became like that. Glasses, fanny pack, neon, you know, like in the 70s we didn't have backpacks, glasses, sandals, any of that stuff. Like we'd have we'd carry our stuff in a bag from Oaxaca or something. And this is an example, you know, typical 70s, you know, unbranded, that's probably a borrowed board, Aloha shirt. This guy actually, a backstory is he was the, I never knew this, but he was the head of the Hare Krishna movement, I think, in the islands, and he had a diamond in one of his teeth. So there's kind of yin and yang there. That's the way I go back. That's that. And then there's fully commercialized, you know, he's making money off those logos, and if he got this is Richie Collins, he's from Huntington Beach, California. If he got a photo in a magazine on the cover especially, they got paid out really good money for all the logos, or a full page in the interior. This is typical kind of that punk rock artwork that there was kind of the hippie era artwork, the psychedelia stuff, or more conservative stuff in the hippie era, and then it became punk rock influenced, just the artwork on the surfboards, the music did. This is an example of the unbranded, there's no logo, no nothing, like kind of pure. And you can, this is in '74 at Hawaii, you can see how minimal people are on the beach, whereas now that whole beach would be packed with photographers and videographers and all that. Versus, this is the branded look in the '80s. This is the, where the crowd goes wild over horrible wipeouts. This is an image that I found recently in my archive, and I just love the kind of starkness of it. And like you can shoot and shoot and shoot, and it's hard to, wipeouts are kind of easy to get, but it's hard to get one that's unusual like that. I like just kind of the graphic nature of the board just flying. It shows the power, and probably that board got snapped. In those days, a board was a big deal. If it got snapped, it was about $300. Boards are now about $600 or $800, especially if you had borrowed the board. This is the worst kind of wipeout to a male. Really. Then that's how you protect yourself. This is a famous surfer, Jerry Lopez, who at this spot, he was considered the king of the spot. And he came back years later, and he would surf in these competitions as kind of the legend. And he told me that this wave finally told him that he was too old to surf this spot anymore. Kind of horrible weather. And the reef there is really shallow. It's probably about 4 or 5 feet deep. This is off that same island in Baja, and this is kind of, now you see them, now you don't. This is a Santa Cruz guy, Barney Barron, and he was a character. He had this, that's kind of one of the worst wipeouts you can have, where you fall all the way from the top to the bottom. And he came in, and we were all worried about him. Are you okay? And he goes, yeah, I'm okay. And he just got another board and went out, and within 3 minutes did the whole thing again. Came in, are you okay? Yeah, I'm okay. And he went out again and did it again, believe it or not. This is a sequence of a friend of mine in Makaha, and he's on my boogie board, and I saw this backwash action going on. I go, Curtis, you should go out there on my boogie board and catch one of those. So he went out and he got launched. The lower left is dry sand. And he's okay. He's a park ranger in the Big Island.
Oh my God.
This is a friend of mine in San Clemente at a contest. He was shooting photos, and I guess in a boat you have a safety thing on the car keys or the boat keys that come pull the keys out of the ignition as a safety precaution. And he had pulled the key out without knowing it, and then a wave came. There was a photographer in the front who lost a bunch of camera bodies. This is my favorite. This is a Newport Beach, California, and there's a whole history of these guys body surfing out there at the Wedge in Newport. It's a famous radical wave. And they're the funniest group of guys. They're doctors, lawyers, firemen, and finance, etc., etc. And they have big, wild parties and this and that. So this was just them at the beach going, hey, let's do this. So that's the wedge heads that play. And that's the end of the show. Any questions? Okay. Thank you. Yep, I just retired from photo editing at the Surface Journal And I photo edited for 35 years, 17 at Surfer Magazine and 18 at Surfer's Journal, so I'm really excited. It's a big life change. I've just been at that school for long enough. You know, there was no bad news. So I went out on a good vibe. And you know, what do they say nowadays? Sitting is the new smoking. And I started thinking about that too. I literally sat at a computer all day long, doing work. A guy named my helper that I had for the last couple of years, his name's Sean Parkin. He's great. Yeah. Yes.
Question. Any up and coming surf photographers, young guys that you really like?
Yeah, there's a. I was talking about this the other day. In photography, you can follow. You can kind of be. How can I say this? There's guys who have a vision and create things that are unusual than all this big masses being created. Like, it's really easy to sit in the channel and Tahiti and go boom, 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 boom. Here comes another boom. But there's other guys who can go into that same arena and come up with things that are random and way sideways from the typical. One of my favorite example is like Morgan Masson. There's a guy named Will Adler, Dane Peterson. And that's all I can think of right now. There's other things. But you can see their work and you can see what I'm talking about. Any questions? Okay. Oh,
Are you
yes.
considering putting together a collection of your, it was really interesting when you were referring to the unbranded. Now, are you going to do a book or something?
Well, the book downstairs is pretty much that whole era of the 70s.
Okay, so.
And then the other book downstairs, the 80s is when
it was
basically
branded.
they just started flowing
Right.
free stuff, and every surfer that lives going, yeah, I'll take $1,000 worth of free clothes. So, but they were the trendsetters too. That's why it's the same thing today. There's a name for that. But people who are surf stars. Okay, well, I guess that's about it. Thank you.